Well, Tim, thanks for coming today. Um, this, as you know, is oral history project that I started through the Kansas Humanities Association. And so if you would, just state your name and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and things like that.
Yeah, my name's Tim Barnhart, Timmy Joe Barnhart. I'm from southern Missouri, uh, down around Buffalo, Missouri. We moved up here when I was in second or third grade. Uh, Moved to Raytown, Missouri.
Hmm.
Uh, the summers, my mom and dad both worked. Summers, we went back down to Buffalo and spent all of our summers there. So I always consider that my home. Uh, But we went all through high school, everything here up here in Kansas City. Uh, then right after high school, I did 1 year down at Warrensburg. Then I decided I probably should be going to the Art Institute instead of down there. I didn't have the money to do that. One of the guys that was the head of the library down there told me about being able to get an early out. If I went into the service, I could do 2 years, get early out, and have the GI Bill pay for my schooling, which is the route I decided to try. So I waived all my deferments, and had my knees operated on my senior year in high school. So I had a medical deferment and a school deferment. I waived both those, and they drafted me right away, and I got to go to Vietnam, and when I came back, I had to extend a little bit, but when I came back, I had 150 days almost to the right on it, so I got out, which was, and then they paid my way through school, which was sort of the plan. And then I started working after school, after graduating from the Art Institute. I got a job working out here at Johnson County Community College. That was in '73, and I've been here for about 46 years now, working as a graphic designer. Um,
Which high school did you go to?
what high school?
Hmm.
Raytown High School.
Okay.
And there, I did a lot of sports. I mean, a lot. I was probably football and wrestling. I did a lot of. I tried track. Was on the track team, but I was always probably the last of the long distance runners. But it got me in really good shape for the service. And then being from southern Missouri, we were out in the woods a lot down there. So the Army wasn't a bad thing for me. I was in really good shape, and I was used to being outside all the time. So
What happened to your knees?
I was playing football,
Mm.
uh,
Um,
and yeah, I injured it one my junior year, and then my senior year it just totally went out, and they went ahead and operated on it. I got back in time for wrestling season, but then I guess I hadn't qualified at the beginning of the season or something. I don't know. They
mhm.
said I couldn't do that.
So you were drafted. You didn't enlist, like.
No, I didn't enlist. If you're enlisted, I think there was a lot longer obligation that you had to go through, and if you got drafted and then came back with 150 days or less, they give you an early out, and so I had to work it around that. I didn't want to go through basic in the summer; it was too hot. Like I waited until the fall and waived my deferments, and then the next month they grabbed me, it was in October. Went through Leonard Wood and then down to Fort Polk. Was starting to try to figure out how much days I had left as early as that, and so I signed up for jump school down at Benning to go to be a paratrooper, and that was another 5 weeks I could kill before I went over. Plus, they gave you jump pay.
Mm-hmm.
which was more incentive for me to do that. And I was lucky. I was really lucky. I was attached to I got in with the 101st Airborne 2 or 3 months before they went air mobile.
Mm-hmm.
And if you went over and you were on jump status, you got to keep drawing your jump pay. We had guys coming in after we went air mobile that had huge amount of jumps, and they couldn't draw jump pay because it was an air mobile unit then, that when they went into it. So I was lucky. I was just really lucky. And there was no jumping in Vietnam. I think 173rd tried it once, maybe twice, but United States really didn't do any airborne assaults there. It was all air mobile.
Was the 101st still at Fort Campbell, Kentucky then?
Say again?
Was the 101st still at Fort Campbell, Kentucky then?
No, 101st was all over in the over there that I know of. There were 3 groups of them. 2 of them were up at Hue Phu Bai. The one that I was with, the 3 of the 187th, was down in a place called Phuc Vinh, which was about 20-30 miles north of Saigon. The 187th Airborne was attached to the 101st, and I was with the 187th. And the 506 was also there with us, so that was the 2 that was down there. And we were sort of an extra group, they sent us around a lot. We got to travel. I was really lucky in that I got in with that unit, that we got to travel as much as we did. We didn't have one specific area of operation that we had to stay in on the whole time. We were there for a while, then we moved with the 25th up to Cu Chi when they needed some help. Then the 4th the 9th needed some help up around Dak To, Dak Pek, up in that area, the Central Highlands area.
Mm-hmm.
That was real interesting area. It was really pretty, totally different than down south. And then the area south of Saigon, when we went down there, was real delta. A lot of rice paddies, walking dikes. Central Highlands was just more like, the hills there in Arkansas. And then they moved us from there. The whole battalion moved up to I Corps, and then it was real hilly. It got really hilly. I think long was around 1,200 or 1,200 feet, something like that. Long, Helen, some of those big fire bases up on top of the hills.
Mm-hmm.
So we were up there. So we got to see a lot. We got to see a lot of the country, move around, which was really nice for me, because like I said, I would have gone crazy if I had to walk around one little area of operation all the time.
What year did you go in?
Went in 68 to 69 was when I was in Vietnam. I went in I think around November 67. Then went through basic AIT, jump school, all that. And then,
Were you infantry?
yeah, 11B2P, light weapons infantry, paratrooper. Although once I got over there, it didn't take me long to figure out that it was, when they asked for volunteers for the mortars, I thought, well, I'll try that. And you didn't have to go out in the field as much. You stayed more in the base camps or fire bases. Although what happened was, I think they wanted us to come in so that we could learn how to call in artillery a little bit more. Call in, what they did was, when they needed different line companies like Alpha Company or Charlie or Delta, they needed more people. They would always pull the extras. They'd grab you from the mortars, usually the 4 deuce and the 81s. And then you got to be a line guy there for a while, and then you'd come back. And a lot of times they would do that because we were so used to, especially if you worked in the FDC, the Fire Direction Center with the mortars, you could call in artillery, or you could decide you learned how they called in artillery. And so a lot of times when you went out, they pulled the FOs out of our area a lot. I mean, out of our group. Or if they needed an RTO, somebody to run the radios for a lieutenant, you'd go out. With a line unit, you might be their FO, you might be their RTO, you might be whatever. And then when that mission was over, you'd come back, be with the mortars another 2 or 3 weeks, and then you'd go out with another line company. It might be another. Yeah. Echo Company was headquarters company for our group, and we had the mortars and recon there in that group. So it was interesting. You know, you didn't really know what you were going to do. Towards the latter part of my tour, the last third, when we went up north and got on those hilltops, we were so short of guys in the mortars that they couldn't really pull too many of us out. There was only sometimes 6, 8 people, when you usually have about 40. So a lot of times, instead of having 3 guns and the 4 deuces, we only had 1 tube, you know. And a couple of times on those hilltops, you'd be down to 4 rounds. You wouldn't have enough really to shoot a whole lot. Anyway, and then usually if they got you resupplied, bring in 1,000 rounds and you slick them all up there and get them all put away. Usually the next week or two they'd move the whole fire base somewhere. So, as soon as we had all that stuff to carry with us, but we moved around a lot, and you were with a lot of different people. Like I said, when I was up north, on Long and Helen. The 2 big, we did a lot of relaying. It would be the people in the valleys on one side couldn't talk to the people in the valleys on the other side, or they'd be calling in a fire mission. Depends on who we were under at that time, if we were under the 506 or if it was another artillery battery group that we were under. Some of them utilized mortars a lot. Other ones never fired the mortars at all, especially when we were low on ammo. And so your position was more to relay messages from the FO on one side, calling in an artillery strike from the other, or out into the Gulf of Tonkin, where the big ships were, or relay it to the TAC air, the air strikes that were coming in. It was interesting. You could. Once I got a hold of a radio, I knew pretty much more what was going on. When I was a regular rifleman walking around in the boonies, I had no idea where I was going, what we were doing there. There wasn't a lot of communication. You were doing good to keep in. On the rice paddies, it was good to. When you're walking the dikes, it's good to. Try to keep a good distance between you and the guy in front of you, and try not to let that get too far or too close. And you just followed the leader, and you didn't know where you were going that day or where you'd be setting up until word came back that we were setting up. So it was. I didn't care for that as much as I did once I had a radio. Plus with the radio, I didn't have to carry everything. As a regular artillery guy, regular infantry guy, we carried so much weight. I mean, you carried extra rounds for you. You carried extra rounds for the machine gun guy. If the 81s were with you, you'd carry a couple of rounds for them. You had your claymores with you. You had all your grenades, smoke grenades. I mean, before you got finished with it, you were carrying an awful lot of equipment. And then in the Central Highlands and even up north when we were out humping in the field, there was no dikes, it was just real thick jungle sometimes. Sometimes it was pretty slick.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was so damp. Going up and down some of those ravines was sort of tough,
Mm-hmm.
especially with all that weight. With the radio, it was nice. You stayed if you were working as an RTO for one of the officers, you just stayed close to him, and you heard everything that was happening. You knew where you were going. You knew you get the intel reports. You could get all kinds of information, which was nice.
Can you explain what an FO and an RTO is?
Say again?
Can you explain an FO and an RTO?
Oh, an FO is like a forward observer. You know, you'd be walking along, you get sniper rounds, everybody else is down, and then all of a sudden the shooting starts, and it starts really quick and really fast, and everybody's shooting, and a lot of people aren't looking where they're shooting. They're just got their guns up shooting over the dikes. And a lot of times you don't know really exactly where the rounds are coming from anyway. An FO, forward observer, he can just call in an artillery strike and say, from my location on a direction of 200 meters, give me a battery 5, you know. And the 105s or the 155s, whatever it is you're calling in, will just let loose and just blow that whole grid square up.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you keep getting sniper rounds, and you can call in the gunships, and if that doesn't work, call in the Phantom jets and stuff like that. I was a couple of places where one of the guys actually called in a B-52 strike, you know, and then the whole ground just shakes.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Just amazing how much power those things have. But an FO had a lot of power. I mean, it had a lot of, and you didn't have to carry a lot. You carried your radio, you carried a few batteries with you. Up north, you had to watch it because it got cold at night. People would steal your batteries and short them out and put the ponchos around them and stay warm all night. And the next day, you try to call somebody, and all your batteries are dead. So you had to really watch them, you know. People would take them, and most of the guys that were in your unit wouldn't, but you would mix so many different. You go to a fire base, and there'd be other people there, you know, from another unit. You didn't know any of them. I really didn't meet. I mean, you met a lot of people, but I never knew anybody, you know. And a lot of times you didn't even know the names. You know, they just had weird call names, you know, Thunderhead or nicknames. Everybody had nicknames. It was sort of strange. That's what's interesting about some of the letters my mom saved for me, because usually I would send her. She would send me little tiny cameras. I'd shoot pictures and send her the reels back. She'd develop them, make doubles, and send them back to me and ask me who was what on photo number 1 and who was what. And so I'd write who the people were and try to find out what the names were and stuff. So I can remember who people are, you know, 50 years later or
Mm-hmm.
longer than that, I guess. But it was interesting, a lot of fun.
And what's an RTO?
Well, an RTO is a radio telephone operator. Just a lot of times an officer would be called 4-3, and so you would be 4-3 kilo, and you would stay close to him, and he'd be talking to battalion or talking to his officers and telling them where we're going and what we're doing, and they'll say swing to the left or swing to the right. Sometimes they would be up above, way up high, the helicopters, and they would spot you and direct what you're doing, things like that. So a radio telephone operator was RTO is what we called them.
Mm-hmm.
Now other units may have called them something else. That's just what the group that I was with called them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's specific MOSs for that. Like there's a specific MOS for a mortar
Mm-hmm.
guy. mortarmen. But we didn't, you were just assigned that. And you took that position on for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky enough to take it over right before some of the older guys that had come over with the 101st originally, when they left, that sort of left a void with all the new people. And there was about 5 or 6 of us that had come over in the medium part. So we became the old timers then. And basically there wasn't any other people to run the mortars. We didn't get any mortarmen in, so you just stayed with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was lucky in that respect. I got to stay with it. And then towards the end, you kept thinking that you would probably be making some good rank there, because it's usually a Spec 5 or above that's running the Fire Direction Center, FDC we call it. And we were doing that, figuring the calibrations of the azimuth on the trajectory of the round, how much to cut, how much powder to keep on there so that the round will go where you want it to go. Figure out the direction, the azimuth, all that kind of stuff. Usually that's Spec 5. All of us were PFCs basically doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And we kept thinking we'd make rounds or make rank. And after 3 or 4 months, they didn't do it. And then they finally got some Spec 5s that were in and actually gave them the FTC, and we went back on the line. And then at the end, I was back as a lineman again. So, but there for a good 3-4 months. It was pretty nice working just as working with the mortars. It was you didn't have to go out and hump every day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a few here and a few there, but not every day, which was nice. And the areas where the mortars are set up were on the, like I said, the very top of these hills, and it was incredibly pretty up there. The clouds were below you a lot of time, especially the monsoons come in, and it rained and rained and rained and rained. But a lot of times that would be underneath you, and so you'd look out, and you'd see a hilltop here and another hilltop way over there, and several miles over there another hilltop, and it looked like a white ocean below you. And that was really nice. And you could get mail, and helicopters would fly up and resupply you and things like that. When the top of the mountain was socked in, and it'd be socked in a couple of weeks sometimes, or longer at a stretch, then you didn't get resupplied. You didn't get anything. You didn't get any water. You didn't get any mail. You didn't get. And if there was only 6 or 8 of you up there on top of the mountain, it's just you're up there by yourself. It's steep enough you didn't have to worry about people climbing up and getting in there. You didn't have.
What do you mean by socked in?
Socked in when the monsoons come in, it gets really rainy for quite a while over there. Like I said, when it gets sometimes that whole cloud bank settles below you, and sometimes it settles right on top of you, and the whole thing is just it's misting and foggy, and you can see about 2.5, 3 feet. 5 feet sometimes. I've seen it a couple of times where you'd hold your hand out and you couldn't see, hold your arm out, you couldn't see your hand. It was so foggy. Just amazing how foggy you could get. Most of the time you could see 25, 30 feet, but then it's just really heavy fog. And it missed, just mist and mist. Down south in the monsoons, the clouds were all above you, and it rained, and it just torrential rain and thunder. Powerful, powerful thunder. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference between the artillery and the thunder. It was so loud. But up north when you're on top of the mountains and you're in the clouds and it's just socked in, and the helicopters won't fly in, and you don't get resupplied and stuff. We'd take ponchos and stretch the ponchos out and drip water to get water, and ever so often up at Doc Peck we'd draw straws to see who'd go down off the mountain to try to find a creek, and take a whole bunch of canteens and fill them up and come back up, things like that. Yeah, they had sea rations, had lerp rations. When the weather was good, and if it was a company on top of the hill, the company long was about as big as a football field. That's about as big as it was. And usually a company would be there, and then it would leave, and then the next day or two another one would come up there. The mortar stayed there to man the radios, go back and forth. So if a company left and then you got socked in for 2 or 3 weeks, it might be just you guys up there by yourself for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like I said, it was interesting.
So in 1968, and you pulled your waivers to be drafted. I mean, you knew you were going to go to Vietnam, right? Like, 'cause it's a pretty hot and heavy time, or you were pretty expecting.
I was hoping to get to Vietnam. I kept signing up for it because I was scared they were going to send me over to Korea or to Germany, and they don't have early outs there. So the idea was to get early out, and so you're 18, 19 years old. You got all the confidence in the world in yourself, and I did, and that was another reason I wanted to go to an airborne unit. I thought there's a little bit more training, a lot more physical stuff, and all those guys were in really pretty good shape, and they were all really well trained. So I didn't have any problem at all with that. And like I said, I could get out earlier. I just really wasn't a stateside Army guy. It would have been tough for me to do that. So, and I didn't, Korea, I didn't want to be cold. I like warm weather. I like southern United States. I like it warm. And I just found it really interesting. I was always interested in the Orient, even from a real young age. I think my first teacher was from Japan. Her and her husband had been missionaries over there, and she was always trying to teach us calligraphy and show us all the kimonos and all that stuff. So I've always been real fascinated with that stuff. I was really wanting to go over there, so that's where I wound up.
You make it sound like you were choosing a vacation destination. I mean, there's a significant difference between Korea or Germany and getting shot up in Vietnam. I mean, you're like, you make it sound like I want to go to Vietnam because the weather's nice. But I mean, weren't you like not concerned about the combat or?
No, I wasn't concerned about the combat at all. Only a couple of times would I ever get real concerned with that. You'd always get scared sometimes, but not a lot, because I trusted a lot of the guys who was with me. It wasn't until companies started getting overran, things like that, then you started going, well, whoa, that could happen to me, you're just a naive kid.
I mean, prior to going, you weren't concerned about the combat? I mean, you weren't,
No.
no.
No, and yeah, and everybody acts different, you know, and you might have no qualms about it all, and at one time, and then a week later, the same thing happens, and you act totally different. You think, wow, this gun could jam on me. That was always my biggest concern. The gun jamming. I remember I was about 3 months, less than 3 months. I was getting really pretty short, and we were up on the up north, and we were in a bunker one time, and some guys were talking about, yeah, there's probably somebody out there with a sniper rifle, you know, beading on whoever goes out the door the next. And I kept thinking, I'm not going out. I'm going to wait till tonight before I go out. But usually you never think about that. Yeah, I mean, you just don't.
Mm.
The booby traps down south scared me a lot. They really did. After you first see one or two of those go off, they really scare you. Up north, the tigers scared me a lot. I had never seen an animal like that in the wild, and first one I saw, I just couldn't believe how big they were, how big their teeth were, and it's you're in an alternate food chain out there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I can remember being on a listening post once. I went out with one of the companies, and we had a new lieutenant that was there, and he sent out a 2-man listening post, which was real crazy, because it's hard for 2 people to stay awake all night long. Usually it's 3 to 4 guys, you know. But we go out there, and we go out about 200 yards, 300 yards, and we're sitting out there, and you could and guy I was with going, do you hear that? And I'm sitting there listening to this thing. You smell this big wet dog smell, and then you hear this growling, and it's dark. I mean, it's really dark, and your heart just sort of stops. You think any second somebody's going to be drug off into the woods and eaten, you know. And I go, not me, I guess. And you know, you're sitting there back to back all night long, and both of us stayed awake. You know, it's just like little things like that really spooked me more than an actual. I guess because we had so much support, you had artillery batteries all around you. You had very rarely we would go out of range of an artillery, or the mortars, or the Phantom jets. You call in TAC Air. You had a lot of support. You had to watch for ambushes and things like that, but you didn't have to walk point all the time. You could, that wasn't an everyday thing you had to do. So, especially when I got in with the mortars, you didn't have to go out all the time. So, I wasn't really that concerned with that at all.
When so you go from basic at Leonard Wood, AIT at Fort Polk,
Right.
Louisiana, and then Benning for jump school, and then from Benning, did you just get straight on a plane and go to Vietnam?
No, from Benning. Benning was a weird deal because we were all sitting around there. They were going to give me, I think it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks leave before I went to Vietnam, so I could go home. But Martin Luther King got shot that day I was supposed to leave, and they froze everybody. We couldn't leave. And then it was about 2 days later that I finally got a pass to get home. And I got home and they were doing the riots in Kansas City, and there was all that, you know, setting up the sandbags down there off the plaza and saying that had this curfew, you weren't supposed to go out and stuff, which is crazy. You know, I was home on leave and I was going to go to Vietnam. So I remember I took the car out a couple of nights and my dad wasn't really happy with me for doing that. But
Were you when you went home on leave? Was that in Raytown or in Buffalo?
we were in Raytown then. Dad was in Raytown. Mom, Dad, my brothers. I have two brothers, one sister. And it was sort of strange. I had one brother and one sister both get married while I was gone. And I had no idea they were even thinking about getting married before I left. You know, it's just I got this letter and I go, oh, they got married. And I go, what? Yeah, sort of strange. But yeah, no, all total, I was really lucky where I was. I was real lucky to seen all the things I did. I was real lucky to be with a really good group of people. I think I always have thought that.
How many months were you in Vietnam?
About 13.
13 months?
A little over, yeah. I got to figuring. I was always figuring how much time I had to kill. And I only had to kill, I think, 7 more days, or I was going to come back with about 157 days, and it was like panic. And I found out that our captain could give me could hold me for 7 days for a medical thing or whatever. He wouldn't do that. That captain left. I tried the next one. He wouldn't do it. But there was a 30-day extension I could do myself. So I signed up for the 30-day extension. And then I was about halfway through that 30-day extension, and I think it was Charlie Company made contact with these guys over in the Ashaw Valley, and they started this battle at Hamburger Hill, or Donick By, whatever you want to call it. And the chopper pilot for Blackjack, who was our battalion commander, he was going, you've served your time. Just get the hell out of here. Don't be going out there with this group. And because they were shipping everybody, all the 187th up to the hill. And platoon sergeant that we had at the time said, no, don't, get down to Benoit, sign out of the 101st. You've got your time in. You've done it. And I remember he said, Mother's Day's coming up and your mom wants you home. I was going, good idea. But there wasn't any transports going down and nobody was going back to Hue. So he basically said, just hike on out there to Highway 1 and start hitchhiking down to Benoit and get down there and get over to the airport, the air base there, and tell them that you're trying to get to Benoit. And I did. It took me a couple of days, but I got down there and signed out of the unit. And then and the guy down there, he wouldn't let me get my. He goes, they didn't have any records of me extending. They kept going, you're like 15 days late. Where you been? And then they had a guy that was there, and he was going, well, you can't go back to the States until you get a haircut. I go, what? So I'd go, I'd stand out there, and we'd call off the people that had tickets to go home or get processed that day. And I'd go, they didn't call my name. And he goes, well, you get a haircut, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. I go, okay. So you go get a haircut. And show up the next day, still they wouldn't do it. I got about 3 haircuts there in about a week. So I stayed there. I think it was a good week I was down there. waiting on my papers to come back home. And when I came back home, it was really bizarre because we landed there at Oakland, and there were so many lights. It was just electricity. They had electricity. People were driving. It was weird, and I signed out that night. I had a chance. They had a PX there, and I told my brother if I could, I'd try to buy a tape recorder or something for him. So I went to the PX and bought a big reel-to-reel tape deck for him, and got on a plane, and it was going to be real late at night when I got in, so I flew to Dallas to kill some time. So I'd get in the next day in Kansas City about 10 o'clock. So I flew to Dallas, slept a little bit there, grabbed an early flight, flew up to Kansas City, and I called my mom and dad. They didn't know I was coming home, and so I called. My dad answered, and I said, don't tell Mom or anything. Just come down and pick me up at the airport when I was getting in and everything. And he came down and got me, but when I got home, he'd already told everybody, and they had, welcome home signs and stuff like that. The neighbors were out. That was sort of nice. It sort of surprised me that he did that.
What was the climate like when you come home, like as far as the reception from?
Well,
there are a lot of people like anti-war stuff going on, and
well, I came back.
Or?
I came back. Like my dad picked me up at the airport, and I came straight back to my home, and about 3 weeks later, I was taking classes down at the Art Institute, and it was like, it was weird. It was sort of weird. That was a real climate, or it was real different. But nobody really gave me any problems about it at all. And they're artists, and they really don't judge a lot of things. Most of the people that I knew down there, I had the shortest hair of everybody. But yeah, they were. That was before people shaved their heads and stuff. There wasn't that many of that. I was doing that. Yeah, I really didn't have a whole lot of problems with anybody. In fact, a lot of people didn't even know I was in the service, I don't think. Yeah, I really didn't have any problem. It was sort of weird being out in the open, that took a little bit of getting used to. Because you're not used to just standing out in the middle of a parking lot, Or I remember getting out of church one evening one day, and I went back to the car by myself, and I looked around and I go, holy man, I'm out here all by myself. And I kept looking at all the trees around, Somebody could be watching you, You get a little paranoid, but other than that, it was fine. Reactions were real quick. If a car backfired, I was down, real quick. And then I did that for quite a while. But I didn't have any bad dreams. I didn't have any really traumatic thing happen to me. It was just another step. Just sort of like going over. It was just another step, and you did it, and you did your job and went home. What we did.
So you were almost sent to Hamburger Hill, though, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was just another hill there. But we'd had some big major fights down south. Firebase Pope, and like I said, Alpha Company got overran. They killed everybody there. I mean, there was a lot of fighting around,
Mm-hmm.
but
Were you at the Battle of Hamburger Hill?
yeah,
The 11-day.
yeah, that was that was Charlie Company of the 187th. First made contact. I think it was around May 5th or something like that, and then and that went on for quite a while. It was strange because when I got home, they were doing some news coverage of it, and I saw these guys coming down, and an Echo Company had gone up there, and I saw them coming down. Some of the guys that I knew, which was sort of strange
Mm-hmm.
to be back home and see it because everything was so peaceful here. It wasn't like there was a war going on here at all, but you could see it on TV and yeah, that was really pretty strange. Yeah,
Robert, thanks for joining us here.
and it
on
would have
behalf-
been, to me, it would have been just like another fight. Except it was steep, and Colonel Honey kept throwing people at him day after day after day. I would have thought they would have handled that a little different myself.
Mhm.
I would have backed everybody off and hit it with a B-52 strike for about a week in a row. But yeah, it was a strange one. I'm not for certain exactly why they decided to approach it like that. But I never made those kind of decisions anyway.
Mhm.
I just did what I was supposed to do, and that was that. The yeah, and I think it became sort of semi-famous because they wrote books on it and did a movie on it and things
Mhm.
like that. There was a lot of other battles going on down there too that some of them went on for quite a while.
Mhm. When you came back, you came back in '69, and so there's still quite a bit of war left going on over there.
Yeah, there was.
Were you were you following that, or did you kind of disconnect from that, or?
No, I followed it somewhat. I did. It wasn't mostly after most of the guys that I knew were gone from over there, and like Sergeant Camarino and some of those guys. When they came back, I went down to Fort Polk and saw them. I went down to Campbell a couple of times. Some of the guys that I was with, those 8 or 10 guys that I was with a lot, and they all came back at various times. We all got together and had a couple of reunions where we got together, and one time we even went down to Norm Purvis was living down at Franklin, Kentucky, and we went down to his place, and the next day we all went up to Fort Campbell, and 187th was back by then, and that was sort of strange because they brought out their whole all the brass came out to see us, and they had a parade, and they had a big flyover with all the paratroopers jumping, and had a big jump thing for us. And the guys from Stars and Stripes were there and everything. They were super nice to us for the whole thing. And then it came time for lunch, and then this NCO came over and it took us to the chow line, which was, I thought we'd get to eat with the officers, but but we didn't. And my brother was an officer by then, and I'd gone down to see him several times, and I always ate with him and up at Fort Lewis or down at Polk, I'd always gone in to eat with him. And the officers eat a whole lot better. They have a nice mess hall and really good food. And I was I was just surprised. They hand you this tray and they go through a line and they give you this stuff. I go, oh, okay. I thought they would let us at least go to the officers' mess hall, but they didn't.
Yeah, treat you a little better than that, right?
No, they treated you like your rank,
Mm-hmm.
which was crazy. Yeah. No, most of the time, I think anytime you get into those kind of situations, if you just keep a clear head about you, and don't take it all real seriously, and have a lot of faith that things are going to work out, and they usually do. If they don't, then you adjust to that and make that work.
What'd they say when you told them you were gonna intentionally get drafted and go to war and?
Well, my dad was in World War II. My mom lived through that.
Mm-hmm.
The my brother and I both left for the army the same night.
Same night?
Yeah,
Oh wow.
yeah. My brother got drafted. He was in the school, but he sort of had some problems, and they up and drafted him. But the day they drafted him, the month they drafted him, they had already had their quotas, and they didn't take him. They sent him back home. And then that summer, I got to thinking, they're going to get my brother here pretty soon. If they get him and they send him to Vietnam, I won't be able to get the GI Bill. And so I decided pretty much. I was out riding a motorcycle, and I thought I really ought to probably just go ahead and do my waivers and get that over with so I can get in, or I'm going to lose that chance. And so I did. And and I went down for my physical, and instead of them sending me home like they did my brother, by 10 o'clock it was like raise your right hand and put you on a bus, and you're down at Fort Leonard Wood that night, and it's like, really? Yeah, they just took me that day.
Wow.
My dad dropped me off to get my physical before he went into work, and and my mom was at work and my dad was at work, so there was no way, and he was a carpenter, so no way you could get a hold of it. Nobody had cell phones back then.
Mm-hmm.
So I called this girl that I was going to have a date with that night and told her I wouldn't be able to make it, and call my folks and tell them that I'm down at Fort Leonard Wood, and that's where I went through Leonard Wood and then Polk, and then still didn't get to go home. And then it wasn't until after Benning I finally got to go home, which was.
You called her and said, "I can't make it to dinner. The Army took me away." And she's like, "Is this the best story you can come up with?"
Yeah, that's about right. No, she goes, "What?" I go, "Yeah, no, yeah, because I just had a pair of cutoffs on, and I had an old cutoff sweatshirt. Yeah, they just took us right away right there, gave us clothes and put us up for the night and kept us, which was sort of strange.
That's kind of crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that I'd have a little bit of time, but they didn't, and it all worked out real well.
At any point in like basic training or AIT or jump school or whatever, do you ever think, "Oh man, what'd I get myself into?"
When I first landed in Vietnam, I thought that,
Mm-hmm.
only because we couldn't land because there was ground action, so they flew north, and they couldn't land up north either because there was ground action. So we came back, and daylight was just breaking, and we landed, and just as soon as we got off the plane, the mortar started coming in again. And there was a whole bunch of guys there that was getting ready to get on the airplane
Mm-hmm.
that we had just gotten off of, and they were just panicking like crazy. They thought the plane was going to take off without them, or I kept thinking, this is so bizarre, because they brought fuel trucks out to fill up this airplane,
Mm-hmm.
and there's mortars dropping all around. I'm going, man, I wouldn't want to drive that truck.
Mm-hmm.
It's full of gasoline, and the smell. I didn't the smell when I first got over there was sort of a shock, because there was a lot a lot of open latrines and dead things, and the smell just was that would almost take your breath away, and the heat almost took your breath away. Combined all that together, and that was another reason I didn't really like being a line guy, because it could, a lot of times you'd come back in for a stand down at a big base camp, and out of the boonies, and you come back in and they'll stick you on berm guard duty or burning the latrines off during the day, and it just reeked.
Can you explain what a line guy is?
Well, there was the big base camps over there. I mean, big base camps where they had electricity and cars. And they were like big cities. And then out from those big base camps, you had little fire bases out. That was sort of out in the woods, or out in the boonies a little bit. And usually there wasn't a lot of electricity there, or there wasn't any motorized vehicles. You might have a couple of little mules to carry supplies from a landing pad.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, the individual, the 11 Bravos, the infantry guys, they would go out usually in a company size or battalion size or squad, and you would go out, and we'd call those, that's the line guys. You go out doing riffs, or you go out search and destroy, you go out. Every time you went out, you were doing something else. Sometimes you were just looking for trails, looking for holes, trying to figure out where the enemy was, because it wasn't real obvious. And most of those guys is what we called line guys, And you sleep on the ground. You might have to dig a little foxhole at night, but most of the time we just slept on the ground where we wanted to. In a fire base, usually we dug in, because you were going to be there for a while. And support the line guys that are out there. And sometimes you'd have artillery at the fire bases. Sometimes you'd have mortars at the fire bases. Up, especially down south and in the Central Highlands. Up north, most of the little fire bases in the valley, the pretty good sized fire bases in the valley, they had the big artillery and stuff down there. They didn't take the artillery to the little tiny fire bases up on the hilltops where we were. We might get a couple of quad 50s in, we put a quad 50 up there on both sides of the hill, but we didn't have artillery up there. You might have mortars up there. The biggest being the 4 deuce, which is the shoots around about that long. They weigh about 50 pounds. You drop them down a tube, and they shoot them out. And then the 81s, they're smaller tubes. You can carry them with you, and you have a small round in those and drop those. Most of the time it was just the 4 deuce and some quad 50s that were up there. Quad 50s really are anti-aircraft guns. You get 4 of them, 4 machine guns, and they shoot a 50 caliber round, and they get to going, and they're incredible. And they shoot a long ways.
Yeah.
Long ways. The ones we had, they'd been fired so much, the rifling was out of them. You never know where the bullets were going.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they would just be going every which direction. I think they were more to scare people. A lot of the stuff we had was just to scare people, But the hills were so steep, it was tough to climb up them. So you did that. A lot of when you went out with the line companies, a lot of times, if you were FO or an RTO, a lot of times uh, we would set up you, before you set up for the night.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times you would find you'd say, well, you got about 80% chance you're going to get hit from this direction or from this direction. So you put a DEFCON over here on this one or over here. That's what we call them. I don't know what the actual name are, but it's you figure out where your location is. You'd shoot. I'd usually shoot white phosphorus over here and white phosphorus over there, and shoot a back azimuth, figure out where I was, and then from my direction, on the direction of whatever the compass read, 1-800 or whatever, or 125. From that direction out about 50 yards, 60 yards, then that's DEFCON 1, and you'd type you'd send all of that stuff back in to Artie,
Mm-hmm.
and the Cobras would put that in their machines. So if you were getting hit and you needed them fast, they pressed the button and it flew right there.
Mm-hmm.
Or the artillery knew where that stuff was, so they didn't have to figure out all. They had the azimuths and everything all figured out already. So you'd say, yeah, this is Tiger 1. I need DEFCON 3 or 4. Yeah, everything was all coded, and it changed every 24 hours.
Yeah.
You had a little code book you had to know. You kept busy. There was a lot of things to do like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you weren't doing that, you were setting up your night defensive perimeter. You'd set out your claymores. You'd do all kinds of stuff. And, when you fired those, you just kept your head down because these guys would sneak in and turn them around on you.
Oh.
Or they would take them. You go out the next day and they'd be gone. Or what's really weird, you go out and they'd be turned around, and you'd hear things during the night. You'd think you're going to blow your claymores, and some people would look up and blow them, and boy, it just get you. So you just had to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
You had to know what you was doing.
When you were sleeping on the ground,
Uh-huh.
you weren't worried about them tigers?
If you were with a big group of people, I never was. I saw a gunship once. We went into a place called Firebase Bastogne, and there was a river down below us, way down there. And we landed, and that was a weird deal too, because the guys came by and said, "Get on this chopper. You guys are going up to Bastogne," and you go, "Okay, where?" I don't have no idea where that is. So we get on the plane, and there was about 5 of us, and we flew up there, and we get off, and there's nobody there. You're like, "We're here," and they're going, "Who are you? What are you here for?" And so you hang around the air pad, the landing pad, for a little while, and we hung around there for a day, and then a guy said, "Get on, you're going back down to Evans." And you go. There was a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
The Army's just sort of a lot of miscommunication sometimes. It doesn't run real smooth because there's so many thousands of people out there giving orders. But I remember up there on Bastogne, a helicopter pilot was flying in, and a tiger came out onto a sandbar down there. He just walked out there. And that was the very first one I'd ever seen. And the guys in the gunship went down there and shot it. And then they landed down there, and then they tried to put it in the chopper, and they couldn't lift it. And they came back up and asked for some volunteers, and they went down there and loaded it up on the chopper. And I remember when it landed, I was probably 25, 30 feet from it, and I just couldn't believe that thing had that big of teeth. It's like, those things are running around here. I don't want to go out there by myself, but
Did you ever happen to get close to one while it was alive?
well, that one night we was out on that listening post, and you could hear it and you could smell it, but I never saw it. And that was real spooky. The guy that I was with, his name was Winston. He was from Detroit somewhere, and we just sat back to back, the whole night. And Winston kept saying, "Will this thing stop a tiger?" And I go, "I don't know. I don't know." And then one got on a hill one time when it was real foggy and misty up there, and tore one of the companies that was up there with us had actually they had a company cook and a mess hall, which was great because you didn't have to eat sea rations and stuff. And that tiger got up there and just tore the heck out of that mess hall, and you could hear it out there. But I didn't go out. Nobody I know went out. We were all back in the back, with our guns trained on that entrance to the bunker, thinking we're going to shoot it if it comes through here. But it never did. But that's the closest I ever got to one.
You were in that region. If you were out in a small group at night, you were it was definitely in the back of your head, though, right? Like,
I didn't care for them at all, at all. The most of the animals, you'd see monkeys every once in a while. I got to keep a little pet monkey for about 3 or 4 weeks there one time, and he was just a cute little thing. He'd eat out of your hand, He never did bother me at all, but we had a lieutenant come up on the hill. And
what kind of monkey was it?
It was a little tiny, like, I don't know, I just called it a little spider
monkey?
Little, sit up on my shoulder, and he'd sit inside my shirt and look out. He was a cute little thing. He wasn't necessarily mine. Everybody had it. And he would be over with somebody for a while, and then the next 2 or 3 weeks, he might hang around with you a lot, And then, but anyway, the lieutenant came up and he goes, and he started to pet it or something. I don't know. And the thing bit him on the finger, and he said, "Get rid of that." So I think the next unit that came up on the hill, somebody took it and left with it. So I don't know where it went.
Everybody wants to bite the lieutenant, though, right? I mean,
well, it never bit me. I don't know. It was, but you didn't see a lot of animals around. You saw water buffalo down south quite a bit, but I didn't see a lot of other animals around. I made it through. I made it through Hue once. Was the only town I ever went through. Big town. We would see little tiny villages when you're out walking, doing riffs and stuff around. And sometimes they would be big riffs. It would be like 2 or 3 companies together.
What's a riff?
Reconnaissance in force, I think. Is what it's called. And we did quite a few of those. You go out walking around, trying to find recon in the area, finding caches of this and that. I never found anything. I was with several groups where they found caches of guns and caches of this, and once they were found, you'd pull them out and set them out there, and they'd shoot pictures before they burn them and that sort of stuff. But I never actually found one myself, and I wouldn't be. I had seen enough booby traps and stuff. I don't know that I would have been anxious to reach in there and start pulling them out myself.
Yeah.
but yeah, some of it is just, you see things happening and you learn from it, and you just you just be really aware of things all the time. We had some kids that in our unit it was such a mixed mash of all kinds of people. We had one kid from Guam. He couldn't vote. He couldn't do anything like that, but he could get drafted. Yeah, protectorates. Any of our protectorates could be in there, could be with us, which was strange. And it was hard for me to tell him he looked like another little Oriental kid,
Mm-hmm.
especially with his haircut. The way he looked like another little Vietnamese guy. And when we had these little ARVN scouts sometimes that were, I don't know if they were with the, some people didn't trust them at all because they thought they were NVA that had defected and now working for the United States, and other people thought they were just regular people that wanted to fight with the ARVNs, you know. So I don't know where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
They all seemed pretty nice. Most of them spoke English. Saw a lot of little kids. I really liked the little tiny kids.
Yeah.
They would hang around a lot, especially if we were close to setting up a fire base close to a little small town. There were always little kids buzzing around, which were sort of interesting. But like I said, we didn't stay any one place very long, so you didn't really attach yourself to them too much. Shot a few pictures of little kids and stuff like that. And I'd give them stuff out of the sea rations. There really wasn't a whole lot of things to buy. Couldn't buy anything out there. There were some people that went into different villages, but I never did. Just didn't go there. I never drank, so I didn't really go drinking anything. So,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what most of them did, I think. Phuc Vinh, when we were down in Phuc Vinh, there seemed to be a lot of guys from the unit go out and get. They'd get caps on their front teeth, gold caps with a little diamond in it. There was about 4 of us guys that would not do that. Everybody was going, oh yeah, everybody in the unit's doing it. No, I'm not doing it. You know, I don't want a gold tooth with a diamond in it. I just didn't want it. Yeah, just a lot of different people, a lot of different types of people.